Hello, everyone. Thank you again for joining us. We had a phenomenal panel on Tuesday, focused on gender equity as it shows up in our homes and the benefits and the skills and experiences that we have with that. And today we are going to be focusing a little bit differently and looking at gender equity in the workplace and the benefits that paid leave and parental paid leave specifically have for all of us. I'm super excited for our panelists and our moderator, Anne-Marie Johnson-Teague, to be a part of this conversation. At Fathering Together, our goal is to build supportive communities enriched with resources and stories, and we're going to hear some amazing resources and stories today. So with that being said, I want to introduce Anne-Marie Johnson-Teague, who is an amazing leader in this space and dear friend. She is a C-suite communications executive and business strategist, and the co-author of a book that just hit the shelves just a few months ago, really, called The Book of Dares, 100 Ways for Boys to Be Kind, Bold, and Brave. It's published by Penguin Random House, and I would say it has been an honor to work with her. And the book itself brought a lot of attention to my own thoughts in this area. It's been called a direct answer for parents' cries for building healthy masculinity, respect, and emotional literacy in their sons. And so with that, thank you, Anne-Marie, for being our moderator today, and I will turn things over to you.
Thank you, Brian. And thank you all for joining us here on Zoom, on Facebook Live, and to anyone who might be watching the recording after the fact. We have a brilliant panel assembled today to talk about paid family leave and the barriers that are preventing our families and our communities from achieving care equity. And we know that the timing could not be more critical. We were hopeful that the Build Back Better plan would include a provision for paid family leave, but unfortunately, yesterday news broke that it would be removed. And while this is disappointing, we have an opportunity today to refocus, to learn from the brilliant and dedicated folks here with us, and to sharpen how we speak about these issues. So today I am thrilled to be joined by Haley Swenson, an author and deputy director of Better Life Lab at New America, Tet Salva, a mom and founder of Mom Warrior, which is a platform to amplify ideas, stories, and thought leadership to advance women, and specifically moms and caregivers of color. Michael Perry, a dad and founder of Maple, the family tech app that optimizes caregiving. And Molly Dickens, a mom, a stress psychologist, and co-founder and executive director of And Mother, which is an organization working to create a culture where motherhood is not a limiting factor in how women succeed. Now, panelists, you're welcome to put any additional information about you, your organizations, your writing, your leadership in the chat for our audience to check out. And while we won't be doing a formal Q&A, we will bring in questions that you put in the chat or on Facebook into the conversation and do our best to address them as we go along. So folks, as we jump into the conversation, we want to first collectively acknowledge that often, but not always, the birthing partner and primary caregiver is the mother or the female identified partner. And because we live in a male-dominated society, the culture around paid leave policies or lack thereof can reinforce a cisgendered heterosexual narrative. So we are striving to have the most inclusive conversation possible today while recognizing those realities. So even before the pandemic, research showed us that women were doing the lion's share of organizing, planning, and executing housework and caregiving, even while working full-time. And that US work systems and policies and our cultural expectations often reinforce those traditional breadwinner and caregiver gender roles. And then the pandemic brought us to our knees, many of us. We were all balancing the stress of what we were collectively experiencing, plus working from home and homeschooling and childcare and elder care. And the list really goes on. And we know we felt it in our households, in our workplaces, and in our communities. And for the very first time, for so many people, the invisible became visible. So I want to ask our panelists today to introduce themselves by sharing a brief story that connects them to the issue of care equity and paid family leave and why it's important to them. So Tet, if you'll kick us off, then each panelist can speak afterward.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. What an esteemed group of people that I'm with today. So I'm a mother of 4 girls, and for a long period of time, I was self-employed. I was a consultant, really around doing organizational transformation and organizational strategy. And the reason why I chose that path as opposed to becoming a full-time employee was it offered the flexibility that I needed to care for my kids. However, it was really painful to not have any kind of support as a self-employed person here in the United States. And when I did, I did have the privilege of getting parental leave, I basically was asked to go back to work after 4 weeks of being on leave because of a fire drill. Hopped on a plane, stopped nursing, all of the things to go and take care of this thing. So I had wanted to really put into the forefront the challenges that women, specifically moms, have in the workplace. And when you're a woman of color and a mother, that barrier exponentially grows. And I've experienced it in my own life. And so that's why I'm here. I'm fighting for this. I'm fighting for gender equity because I don't want my girls to have to make the hard decisions that I made, between career and caregiving.
I'm happy to go next. I am first of all, really excited to be here. I'm a researcher who's been looking closely at paid leave for several years now. And the original reason I came to this was my focus on gender equality. I've always been really interested in what are the structures that make it so hard for people, even with the best of intentions, to sort of carve out the kind of work, life, and care balance that they want and that would be meaningful and effective for them and what they're dealing with. And the fact that the US has been such an outlier always stood out to me, but I never had a personal experience needing leave until the pandemic hit. I was living with my then fiance in Washington, D.C. when the pandemic started, and we were in a very tiny apartment. When the orders came down basically to work from home, we realized we did not have the space to do so. So our whole lives sort of changed overnight. We ended up coming out to Utah to live with family temporarily so we could have a place to work. We brought our cats and we canceled a wedding. I mean, everything changed for us and what we thought that our lives were going to be. And about a year ago, almost a year ago exactly, my wife and I had been married for about a month. We ended up eloping, and it was a beautiful wedding, not exactly what we had in mind, but really lovely. About a month after the wedding, I got up. I had a bunch on my plate that day. I had a lot of work to do. We'd been tracking paid sick leave and access to paid leave across the workforce during the pandemic. I was in a new house because of the fact that, everything had been turned upside down. And it's a crazy accident. I went to go feed one of my cats breakfast, and I stood up. I was down in a squat. I stood up, and our new granite countertop was right above my head. So sort of the full force of my body hit in it. It knocked me out. My wife found me there. I missed work for 7 weeks right off the bat, and then later for another 3 weeks to recover. It's been a really long road experiencing a traumatic brain injury and learning how many other Americans experience accidents like this that really impact them for a long time. And it was that experience to me, I ended up writing an editorial about it for the Salt Lake Tribune, because Utah is one of those places that is all about family values in rhetoric. But here I was, and if I hadn't had the kind of workplace I had where everybody said, how can we help? Let's figure this out. My fiance and I, my wife and I at that point could have been in a lot of financial trouble with that accident if I hadn't had that ability to keep my job and keep my paycheck coming in while I missed work. So that's sort of the gravity I bring to this situation, just realizing how important leave is, even when you don't think it's something that is going to matter for you. And now, as we're embarking on the journey of having our first baby, it's omnipresent, and looking around and seeing it, how Congress had this opportunity now and missed it. I think all of us now see what leave means to us, and the ways we can't even foresee needing leave. So that's what brings me here today, and I'm just really excited for the number of folks who are now thinking about paid leave and how it really applies to them, and what it would mean for us to really make sure everybody in the society has access to it when they need it.
I'll go next. Again, thank you so much for having me. My journey, I think, in understanding this and really kind of driving awareness around this, obviously a bit of an outlier on this panel as the only male. In 2016, I was a founder of a company that I sold to a publicly traded company at 29. And my first or second week on the job, I sat in on an executive roundtable, and the woman sitting next to me, we all had to go around the table and discuss one thing that we were stressed out about. And she at the time was about 7.5 months pregnant. And everyone else at that table was a male, and it was all these other issues. And she said she was very concerned about finding a backfill for her time on paternal leave. And from a place of ignorance, I said, I don't understand why this is so stressful. Aren't you going to be back in about 4 or 6 weeks? And she said, no, I'm taking a year off. And that was mind blowing to me because A, I wasn't a parent yet, and B, I was an American now working for a Canadian-based company, and always just thought parents went back to work 3 or 6 weeks after giving birth. And that was kind of the start of, and as my team grew to be roughly 200 people and parents started reporting into me, that was my first, I think, dipping of the toe into understanding the delta between in the parental experience between men and women and between America and everybody else. It was kind of like an all-encompassing awakening moment. Miss Salva said something that kind of touched me, and I guess in a lot of ways, why I got into building my company Maple, which is very focused about home equality and shifting the 80-20 dynamic of households to 50-50, is she said, she had to make a decision between her career or caregiving. As a white male, I have never had to make a difficult decision like that. And I felt it was appropriate and needed for me to use my platform and voice to try to erode the divide between men and women, or people that identify as mother or father, to try to bring more of a 50-50 experience to our core human purpose of being a parent.
All right, I guess I'm last. Thank you again for having me, and it's cool being on this panel with you guys. So I'm excited to get into it more. So I'm Molly. I have 2 daughters in elementary school, so deep in the weeds of pandemic parenting, but now they're in school, and that's wonderful. I feel like many of us kind of don't realize the need for leave and the time needed for leave until we have the experience. So my experience is similar to that. For my first daughter, I was doing a postdoc, and in many ways, so this is, after graduate school, in between going for, professor positions, if I stay on the academic track. And I was funded. I was on my own fellowships, on a fellowship from the NIH. And when it came time to figuring out my maternity leave, it was very vague with what it allowed. And it was only allowed if you were at a university that allowed it. And luckily I was at Berkeley. And so it's like the most progressive you could get. And still looking into the language in my fellowship, it was like, well, you can take 2 months. I mean, the clock doesn't stop, meaning I have a 3-year fellowship. So I still have to get done what I should get done in the 3 years, but maybe I will go slower for 2 months. Like, that doesn't make any sense. The other option was to be able to stop the fellowship and take unpaid leave for up to 2 months. And then if I was on health insurance through that, that would have cut my health insurance off too. Luckily, in a position of privilege where my husband was getting paid well and I was on his insurance, so that wasn't a problem. But even just having this realization and going to the HR person at the University of California, like big progressive university, she looked at me and she was like, no one has ever asked for 4 months before. And I was like, but we, don't get paid that much. So finding infant care, if I didn't have the second income at home to help support that, would be impossible. So I would pretty much have to make that choice of, am I just leaving my postdoc or am I continuing? And then it was also the message that it sent to me as a young scientist, that my value as a scientist for my career as a scientist I was not valuable on that long term to justify taking this little window of time to go slower. Like, that to me was so insulting. And you see it in this big drop off in female scientists, like that happens to perfectly coincide with this window between grad school and getting a tenure track position. On the paternity leave side, on the gender equity side of it all, luckily my husband was working for a company that gave a 6-week paternity leave. And during my window of maternity leave, I actually had I got called in for a job interview for an academic. So in academic positions, tenure track positions, these interviews are like 36 hours long, like they're 2 days solid back to back. And the only way to prepare for this interview, I found out about it a week after I had my daughter. I had to go to it when she was 5 weeks old. I had 4 weeks to prepare. And luckily they flew him out. And so having him off during that time, like, yes, it was so valuable for me, for my physical and my mental recovery and for baby bonding, for all the things, but it was also critical for a career moment that I would not have otherwise been able to take this opportunity if he hadn't been off. I would have had to just say no, because I wouldn't have had any help to prepare and to then bring him out there to take care of a baby for this interview, because that's not something that you can bring along a baby while jumping in and out. So it was this great visual on like, how are we valued as human beings that have this part of this journey in our life, and as workers contributing to society. And then, with Ann Mother, my co-founder is an athlete, and we're focusing on sports, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, but seeing it through her lens of how her body was valued and how she was pushed because she didn't have any kind of leave in her policy. It was just this universality of it, and the real health implications and the real career implications, and how we see gender through this lens. It was so frustrating that it was like, paid leave, it's such a no-brainer. It's such a no-brainer. But I'll stop there.
Thank you, Molly. Thank you all for sharing those personal stories, because I feel like with so many political issues, like it helps folks to relate, to hear from human beings behind the issues. So we want to continue the conversation and really think through 2 key areas that'll help us better understand the barriers to care equity and the potential impact of a universal paid leave policy. So we know we've got cultural barriers that are the result of our gender socialization and our societal values. And then we've got systemic barriers like policy and other organizational structures. Haley, I know at Better Life Lab, you've done extensive research on the attitudes fathers hold about caregiving and care equity. Can you share what your research reveals?
I'd be happy to. I'm going to drop this in the chat here too. This is a report that my team released at the very end of 2019. So just a few months before, before it all happened. What we found here, well, let me first say what we were looking for. I mean, just to set the stage a little bit, the United States only passed a right to unpaid leave in the early 1990s. And at this point, countries outside the US have had maternity policies at the very least in place, in some cases up to 100 years in Latin America. People would be really, really surprised to learn how long. So the US is already an outlier in the 90s, passes unpaid leave in what we call the FMLA, which basically says workers who've been at this kind of workplace for this long can have 12 weeks without pay, but still get their job back. Very, very low bar. However, really critical for some workers. Many Americans have used the FMLA since it was introduced. But along with that, what we have seen are lots of patterns of inequality develop. One of those patterns of inequality is gender, that men and women are using leave at different rates. And we found some of that in our study. But one of the others is class and race. What we've seen is that those who have access to paid leave are at the very top of jobs, and generally in the private sector. Workers who aren't in that sort of elite setting tend to have no leave at all, and many don't even have access to unpaid leave. So what we wanted to do was understand, how are Americans managing this right now in this ad hoc system where about half of workers don't even qualify for the unpaid leave, others are getting it from employers. What does this look like for Americans? And we really did want to zoom in on this question you raised. is it structure or is it culture, and where can we sort of see the line between both? So that was sort of how we went about this study. It was based on a nationally representative survey that we then supplemented with a lot of focus groups. And what we found, first of all, was, I'll start with the bad news. Only about half of moms and dads said that they took a leave when their child was born. That means, I mean, a lot of bad things, right? On the one hand, it means many dads said, I didn't even take more than 2 days off. I mean, not even 2 days, you know. I think we get in conversations like this where maybe if our peers have said, I took a week, I took 2 weeks, we kind of start to feel that that's reality. What this study found was a lot of dads didn't even take that. Now, when we look at the data that says moms didn't take it, even more alarming, right? We know that minimum 6 weeks is what doctors recommend just for the basic physical recovery from, you know, what they would consider a healthy and normal birth. So already very, very limited. So what are moms doing? In some cases, moms are leaving their jobs because of the lack of leave. And there's a sense we'll come back later and find something else. So what we saw were there were enormous financial penalties for those who weren't able to take a paid leave when they found another way to take time off that they absolutely needed. But the good news was that we found we did not surface a lot of cultural resistance to the idea of men or women taking leave when they have a new child. This idea of parental leave seems really normal to most people. Where people get caught up is the how of it. I think people bring a lot of preloaded assumptions about that. But really, we saw from men and women when we asked a question like, do you anticipate in the next few years needing an extended leave to welcome a new child? Men and women were just as likely to say yes. Also, when we asked, do you anticipate needing leave to take care of an aging adult in your family or somebody else who's sick? Same number of men and women said yes. So in terms of what people want, what people think the society should do, really, really good news. The sort of the next step though came in with the structural barriers. And when we asked Americans, okay, if men and women say they want to take leave at the same time, we're also looking at data that shows they don't, right? That's the reality, that women are more likely to take leave than men are. Why is that? The number one answer that Americans gave was men just cannot afford to take leave. Right. And I think that answer is so interesting for so many reasons, because number one, many men really cannot afford to take leave, just like many women really cannot afford to take leave, especially if they don't have a paid policy. That lack of income that's coming in is a serious, serious barrier. But there's also a cultural component to this as well, because we know that even when women can't afford to take leave, they take it anyway, right? So in our study, we found women are more likely to take unpaid leaves than men. If men take a leave, it's more likely to be a paid leave than an unpaid leave. And we know a lot of American families have structured their model around the idea of one big earner and somebody else who maybe brings in some income, but is a primary caregiver. So it makes sense men would say, I just can't afford it. But because we know women take it when they can't afford it, we know there's a cultural component to this as well. So where that put us heading into the pandemic before the world fell apart and everybody knew they needed leave at some point for some reason, this is what we found. And this was sort of the conundrum that we zoomed in on. Men say they want leave. People say they have no stigma against men taking leave. Workplaces increasingly say that they want men who are involved fathers to be a part of their workplaces. There's all this cultural will toward it. And yet at the end of the day, after a pandemic, after paid leave made it through Build Back Better, through months and months of steps, it's off the table once again. And I think it really brings our attention back to that question. Why don't men take it? They can't afford it. We have to invest money in this. Right now, the dollars and cents just are not adding up for men or for women to make the kind of leave choices that they want to make. Some of the good news is various states have passed great paid leave policies over the last few years, some of them far more inclusive than other countries' basic maternity and paternity leave. They understand the complexity of family. They understand concepts like chosen family. They allow you to take leave, not just to take care of a new baby, but a kid who's become sick later on in life. They're really flexible policies. And I think what we'd hoped was that the federal government would be including that and meeting this challenge that surfaced in that report. That's not happening, but it does take us back to this square one. We know the will is there. We know this is the kind of policy Americans want to see in place. The question is, how are we going to pay for it? And making the case to others that we have to invest money in it, or people won't use it. And when they do use it, they will use it in ways that add to gender inequality rather than reverse it.
Thank you, Haley. You bring up a lot of important points, one of which is just that men are such an important part of this conversation. So Michael, I want to go to you. Talk to us a little bit about how you've designed Maple to not only help optimize families' approaches to household management and care, but also to appeal to men and to empower them to be part of the solution.
Yeah. And Haley, I think by the way, that was very informative. Thank you for sharing that. I do think that there are some masculinity issues even amongst my own male friends who don't want to take time, but maybe later in the conversation we can address as I was attacked on Twitter last night. I think when I went back to work, my wife is a full-time caregiver. And again, it was an eye-opening experience because she had reproductive issues and decided to leave her job to take an IVF journey. And after we had our son and I did take 2 months off and went back to work, I realized how skewed the caregiving actually was. And I had no idea what was going on in our own household. I didn't know when his doctor's appointments were. I don't even know the name of his dog. Like, it was just like this. I'm traveling for work, I'm working. She's at the forefront of our house, taking care of everything. And I actually felt for the first time inadequate as a partner, but also inadequate as a father. And I just didn't want that to be the case, to be quite frank. And so I left the job I was at, where I was a leader in the marketing technology sector, and decided, how can we take the best of all of the technology advancements we've made, and how can we bring an open platform so that families can universally understand the tasks and the responsibilities needed to run the household at a household topic level, whether that's individual children, bills and finances, just grocery shopping, household management, whatever the things are that go into your household running. How do we kind of lift the curtain behind that and create exposure of all the moving pieces? And how do we build the tooling associated with that so that everyone can be a part of the conversation and contribute? And so that was like our basic thesis to getting started, was that, parents, again, have been kind of abandoned. Technology has been focused between two big pockets, and that is, and I'm using umbrellas here, consumer technology and SaaS enterprise level technology. So if you look at the beginning of humankind, which every step of human evolution has been directly associated to tooling, our initial tools were designed to help us take care of our families better. Hunt, make fire, build shelter. And then we interjected currency during the Bronze Era, and all tooling immediately shifted to making our jobs more efficient. All tooling shifted to making more money because we live in just like a capitalist society. The most advanced thing in human tooling has been arguably the stove, the dishwasher, and maybe Instacart are like the three big, the car. It's like basic things, but where's the streamline of technology? And so Maple today, we launched 2 months ago. We have almost 10,000 families using the product across the US and Canada. We're very proud of what we've done. We've seen tens of thousands of tasks be created, but still the data is strikingly sad, right? So when a father or a man that or a person that identifies as a father signs up for Maple, it's almost at 100% that they invite their life partner to join them in the application to work together. If a person who identifies as a mother signs up to use Maple, half the time they have the willingness to invite their partner, and half the time the partner actually accepts that invite. And so you do kind of see some, stark sadness in the data on our onset, but you also see that there's a very heavily engaged audience for the partners that are working collaboratively together. And our job over a course of probably decades is to say, how can technology, by way of awareness or education, we're doing a lot in AI and machine learning in terms of educating the partner on the inequalities of the household. How can we just try to create that shift from 80-20 to even our goal next year is just 75-25? What technology investments can we do to make incremental shifts in kind of behavioral structure in terms of how this legacy system is that we've all kind of inherited? And I just think that we're well on our way, and excited to see how we kind of reshape the home with our household operating system.
Thank you, Michael.
Absolutely.
This is great so far. We've gotten through a lot of barrier talk. I really want to get into the benefits and make sure we have a lot of time to speak to why this is so important. So Molly, if you don't mind, you talk a lot about how policies that support caregivers are really preventative medicine. Can you speak to the benefits of paid leave to public health?
Yeah, so as a trained stress physiologist, and I've spent I jumped off the academic track several years ago, but I've continued kind of working with academic colleagues in the space of stress and maternal mental health, especially. And it's kind of a long way of saying that I see stress everywhere. And everyone can kind of look back at the last almost 2 years of pandemic parenting and see what the stress was in their life, especially through this lens. And in a way, we were on this precarious edge as parents already. It was not a new problem before the pandemic. The social safety net of care was already fraying, and for many people, more frayed than for others. And when you think about leave and childcare and elder care, but what the parental pandemic, I feel like that experience did was it made the issues almost so universal that we were guinea pigs in this big experiment to document this health toll on unsupported caregiver stress. And the result in that you're seeing, and you'll see it for years, maybe even decades, that you're seeing the health impacts on parents over this year. You're seeing the increased rates of mental health disorder. You're seeing the spiking rates of perinatal anxiety and depression. You'll see long-term health effects. And there really are ways to connect all these pieces and see all the elements of stress and the potential opportunities to alleviate those stresses. So, for example, we know that stress exposure comes from lack of supportive policies, like having additional financial strain, having concerns about losing your job. This impacts health negatively. We know that supportive policies that lower parental stress, like having community support, having caregiver support, having a secondary caregiver at home to take care of a baby with you during that time window, these improve health outcomes. So the pieces are there to make the argument of how stress impacts health and how stress on caregivers impact health. And the most important thing, I think in the opportunity is also we can focus on small windows of time, like immediately after birth, and having paid leave for both partners in this window of time, because we know it will have outsized impacts on the health of parents and the health of the child or children. 4 weeks, I was even excited when 4 weeks was still on the table for Build Back Better plan, because 4 weeks is a great start. It's not everything, but it's a great start because it really captures this window of time. And it's when the birthing partner is recovering physically and mentally, and their body is shifting in ways that has put them to this, I think of it as this physiological edge. And it doesn't take much to push over that edge. It just takes a few things, a few added stresses to this. And those added stresses, that pushing over the edge, that can have a lifetime of repercussions. And like, in my mind, it's just like, for what? For a few extra weeks? For a few extra weeks, we are leading to a lifetime of health repercussions because we set someone up, we set their body up to fail in a way to think about it. And it's not just about moms. Like, as I emphasized before, non-birthing partners are critical during this window. They're critical for this stress alleviation on the birthing partner. For anybody who joined the Tuesday panel, the thing that I loved Dr. Fisher talking about his research on working with fathers to affect maternal mental health. Like, it's such a great example of this in action. And the other thing is that non-birthing partners are going through their own physiological changes. They're going through their own neurological adjustments to parenthood, and they're also prone to postpartum depression. Men are prone to postpartum depression. The research is more scant for reasons I won't go down that rabbit hole, but they are. And everyone is prone to these stress-related illnesses. And so, yes, on a public health level, if you look at these elements and you look at all the potential stressors that we put on families, and you look at how we chip away by having supportive policies, having paid leave, having caregiver support, we can chip away at this. And the other important thing that I want to point out is, many of us are in a position where we are impacted by these stressors, but there's whole communities that are already set up at a higher stress level because of financial strain, because of the stress of racism. They're starting at a higher baseline. It's easier to tip them over the edge. And oftentimes they're also the ones who are working in least supported jobs. And that is a public health crisis. That's what we need to address. And framing it in this context of stress and seeing it as preventive medicine, it stimulates a different conversation around health impacts and a holistic view, and healthcare costs, and however you need to frame it. But it opens it up to have different conversations and see it through that way. So.
Thank you, Molly. That intersectional awareness is so critically important. Tet, how would a universal paid leave policy impact the moms and caregivers of color that Mom Warrior represents?
Gosh, it would be so great to have it. And I think Molly hit on this really well, where a lot of the families that are affected by paid leave really, if you take a look at it, are those communities of color who don't have the access that a lot of us have. And I just have to say, I'm still blown away that we are having this conversation here in the US. We are one of the most innovative countries and the developed country, and we're having a conversation around paid leave. I mean, where I'm from in the Philippines, we give, I think, 12 weeks. So I'm a little bit just shocked. And when I heard about the Build Back Better policy and paid leave being taken away, I was like, what is happening? Why? And so a lot of, the women that I serve are women who are just trying to make it day by day. Some of them don't have paid leave. I've experienced that as somebody who was self-employed for the longest time, and it's not fun. Going back to work consulting after 2 weeks of giving birth, for those of you who have given birth, you know how your body is still doing at 2 weeks time. So, but I had to, because if I don't work, I don't get paid. And so having universal care, I think, would just really help and provide that needed infrastructure, not just for the families, but also for the kids, right? I think they will have parents that are less stressed out, to Molly's point. And it just is common sense in my mind. And yeah, there's a lot of research out there as to why it's not just paid leave. If you take a look at what paid leave can do, it drives 5.5 times revenue growth. The talent retention goes up. You attract more talent. You're building diversity and inclusion within your organizations. And so I do hope that at some point we do go back to this universal paid leave. And I hope that I'm hopeful, but at the same time, until we have somebody at the very top who really understands the issues that we face, then we are going to keep fighting this fight.
Thank you, Tet. You're right. And, we're kind of back to square one today in a lot of ways. I mean, part of the discussion was that if we had passed a universal paid leave policy, they estimated that 18 million people, 1 in every 9, would be able to take it in the first year alone. Women would comprise 52% of that 18 million. Michael, talk to us as a man, and he just went off video. So if I need to go to Haley, I can do that. But if you are able to speak, as a father, as a man, what can we do to emphasize how men will benefit so that if and when we get a universal policy, they will engage with it?
Well, I'm sorry if you can hear my background noise of lawnmowers and things, but so much about this conversation is so important, because I think there's a whole conversation about how we're doing a disservice to the person who's given birth. And obviously it's been very hard for me to even stomach and sit through this conversation because I have not given birth. I have a 10-week-old at home, and my wife just went through a C-section, and there's a 0% chance she could go back to work right now. She's still recovering from a C-section. And so I think that there's two things that have to happen. In my personal opinion, and this is what I'd expect from my sons as they grow up and hopefully have a positive impact on this planet. One is, I think that the 1%ers should be the common denominator of how we look at care. I would ask President Biden, would his own wife be going back to work after 2 weeks, after 3 weeks, after 4 weeks, after 5 weeks, after 6 weeks? So more men in leadership, they need to, sorry, there's so much noise.
It's okay. Let's give Haley a second to chime in here. Haley, I know your research includes the attitudes of a lot of fathers. Feel free to speak on what it would take to get men more engaged.
Yeah, I think what men need to get more engaged is honestly a thumbs up from the people they see as above them. I mean, that really is a big difference maker. It's hard to remember right now, but in the first few months of the pandemic, one of the first emergency acts that Congress passed included an opportunity for parents whose kids were out of school to take some paid leave to deal with that. And it was really focused just around the initial lockdown stage. But what we found really interesting, most people didn't know about this. Congress did a terrible job of advertising it. But I was talking to a reporter who was trying to find experiences from people who had used it. And one of the first people she found was a dad. And the reason he ended up taking the leave, he and his wife were totally stressed out about how they were both trying to work from home with little kids around them. What made the difference was his manager emailed. His manager emailed the whole team and said, hey, here's this policy. I know I've got parents on my staff. I would encourage you to use this. So the way that he used it was I think could be spread out over 10 weeks. Apologies if I get the numbers wrong. He used it every Thursday and Friday, every week. So he was still part of his team and he was still there and he felt supported, but he was also able to just make what his family was dealing with at home so much easier for everybody by saying, these are days I'm a caregiver. And that really stood out to me because I don't know that without that manager, he would have ever known about the policy, much less felt that he could use it without disrupting what his teammates were trying to do in a scary situation or what his boss needed from him. And when we did our focus groups, I have to say, that was a lot of the stuff people told us about when we said, what was your experience of needing leave? When your baby was born, these were really engaged fathers who, really prided themselves on being engaged fathers. And it was all about their workplace. It was all about the tone set. So even though we're talking here, you have to have a policy in place. You have to have a way to fund this. Self-employed people, small businesses, they cannot afford to front a program like this on their own. There are these things that are cultural that we've talked about that can be initial nudges. And I think they're so incredibly valuable. I mean, Build Back Better is about a whole suite of policies that people with care responsibilities need to make their lives easier. And they're all important, every single one. Pre-K, long-term care for aging people, all of them go hand in hand, really, when it comes to lived experience. But I will say this about what's so hard about losing paid leave here is that what it does is when that manager says, hey, I expect you to use some leave, maybe a manager finds out that one of the men who works for them is expecting their first child, go out and say, I expect you to take leave, whatever is offered, whatever you can. That's an expectation. It's a norm. I think saying that sets the stage. And what that means is we never get ourselves in situations like the one Michael talked about, where because of the difficulty of the fertility treatments and pregnancy and the way our workplaces work, it already kind of becomes these two separate tracks of caregiving and working. And paid leave is this brilliant moment right at the start where the couple gets to start from a more common experience. We're both off work right now. No, both of us may not have given birth here, but both of us are invested in this and trying to respond to caregiving and keeping track of doctors' names. And that sets the tone for the whole childhood, the whole relationship moving forward. And that's why parental leave is so critical. So I think what we need to have, yes, we have to redouble our fight at the public level to get this policy passed. But every person who's angry it didn't pass right now needs to be talking to their managers, their employees, their direct reports about what that means and how they're going to be responding to it. And honestly, I think most of the progress we've seen made, the work that Tet did to pass these policies at her former company, the work that was done to get Amazon to boost its policy, Walmart, these have been led by moms. These have been led by women who had these experiences, got their friends together and said, no more of this, let's make it better. And if men need to hear it, I'll say it right now. You can make a difference. People highly value your opinion and the way that you set the tone for how your workplace handles these things. So speak up, speak to anybody who will listen. It really does make a difference.
I don't know if this is the appropriate time for me to jump back in on that level, because men do need to speak up. So as I was finishing my thought, I think that men have to do a better job of setting the expectation of what care looks like. And two is that I think we've poorly defined what masculinity is from Stone Age to now. I'm not out there with like a fucking rock and a bow trying to shoot an elk running down my street to provide for my family. And the argument that I've gotten in with people is that how sad that you're missing out, if you can, on such a special time, because your child is tiny for a little bit and they're big forever. And B, how you show up in your own relationship matters just as much as how you show up at work. My wife, who was bedridden, would not have been able to care for our eldest son comfortably as she's been stitched back together, recovering from a C-section. So it was even less about me in that time caring for our newborn and me showing up to care for our 2-year-old as I took a leave of absence from my own company. And then I would say lastly, again, I'm calling on all men in leadership for that matter. And that is to not necessarily wait on the government to step up to do the right thing, but to do the right thing in their own organizations. We've rolled out 3 full months paid parental leave for both mom and dad at Maple, plus an additional month of unpaid time off, plus $1,000 stipend to help them set their family up for first child, $500 stipend for second child, and a flexible schedule to return back to work. And I'm a tiny company. There's plenty of publicly traded companies and public and very well-funded venture-backed companies that are male-led that should not have to wait to be pressed into doing the right thing. And that's the act that I can at least play, is not screaming for rooftops about how this is just necessarily affecting me, because I do think every woman has a right to be vocal right now about the unjust system that we live in. But there's an opportunity for men to, I think, uniquely step up right now in non-political roles and to recognize that this is not actually a political issue. This is a human right issue, and that they should be wanting to take care of their staff in the best way possible.
Thank you, Michael. It's so important for men in positions of power and influence in leadership to set the tone and set the example. Can't stress that enough. You all have made such compelling arguments today for why paid leave is not extra, it is essential. We know that even pre-pandemic, the lack of paid leave cost American families an estimated to $22.5 billion in lost wages. So we need to push this thing forward. Let's close the conversation today, hearing from each of you on what you see are the critical next steps to create meaningful change, knowing that what we thought it was yesterday shifted a lot to today. Molly, why don't you start us off? And then I would love to end with thoughts from Tet. So let's just go down the line. Thank you.
Oh man, I mean, I think Haley and Michael, I think they pointed it out so well. It's, we all, especially those of us in privileged and protected positions who are able to make asks without repercussions, we need to start making them. We need to start being the ones who are leading the cultural change. We need to ask for other people and set new policies and set new examples for better internal policy as we continue to fight for federal policy. I think we need to continue fighting for federal policy too. I think seeing this in where I'm working now in terms of in the sports industry, trying to bring a very male dominant industry into the space of recognizing that the burden shouldn't just be on female athletes. You have to incorporate paid parental leave and parental leave policies for male athletes, and those who have leverage to ask for this need to be the ones leading the charge on it. It can't, the burden cannot be on women. This is a gender equity issue. We all need to step up if we are able to. So I don't know if that actually answers. I got totally thrown off by it being cut, but deep breathing. So fight goes on.
I think I'm up next, so I apologize. We'll have Michael and Ted, I think. So I've said a lot of what I want to say about next steps in my last remarks about just the need to have more people speaking up, speaking out, making changes within their own organizations. Wherever you have a lever to pull it. You know, it might make a difference for you, or it might make a difference for a coworker or somebody who's not even at your organization yet, but who will be someday. So please do that. I think the other thing I just want to say as we're closing this is, you know, one of the reasons Joe Manchin gave for why he wanted paid leave cut to hit the sort of budget he had in mind for this bill, he cited his grandkids. You know, he said, I've got 10 grandkids. I just couldn't do this to them. And I think what I'd like to see for us to move forward is that statement seems patently absurd to everybody who hears it, and not just, you know, me and those of us who've been in this movement for a while. Because the truth is, this is not a question of can your 10 grandkids afford this paid leave program? The point is, your 10 grandkids cannot afford not to have this paid leave program. That's what we've seen. That's what we've seen across the board. And I think most people who are starting to understand what paid leave works and how it works as a public system, they get that. But when we finally get universal paid leave across the finish line, it's going to be in an America where statements like that just don't hold water for a second, because everybody can see that the cost of doing nothing far outweighs the cost of doing this right, and doing this in a way where everybody benefits. So keep the pressure up, keep it up in every institution. This is a matter of structural change, and a matter of cultural change. You know, those things go hand in hand. People will make the structural changes when people understand that we need a culture of care, that men and women and people of all genders need a culture of care, and they need it at many junctures of life. And I think the more we make that the universal reality and the starting place for our workplace conversations, our political conversations, our conversations with loved ones at home, we're going to get closer to making paid leave a reality.
Well, since this is the last time I'm going to talk, I'm going to say thank you now for allowing me to join the conversation. And obviously, it's been very educational for me. So thank you for having me. You know, I'm someone that knows that, or I shouldn't say I'm someone that knows. I'm someone who firmly believes that things that are important oftentimes take a tremendous amount of time, and oftentimes when they shouldn't have to. And this is one of these basic things that, again, the people who are in power across the board, paid leave is not going to change their life. That's the fucking problem, if we're being honest. And so why would they care when it's not directly affecting them? And so I think that we just have to continue to push forward on the education and the awareness at an individual level. Like, my wife couldn't go back to work. Why would I expect any of my colleagues, men or women, to go back to work if my wife's not back to work at week 10? And I think, again, it can start at the smallest place within ourselves, and just recognizing that we all uniquely on this call share the same human purpose, which is to take care of each other. Our jobs are not our purpose. Our purpose as a species is to make sure our species is well and to continues to go. And so, again, I firmly believe that this isn't a political issue, that this is a human rights issue, that we're stripping people of being able to do their most important job well. And I think it will take a tremendous amount of time, and a tremendous amount of courage, and a tremendous amount of resilience and patience. And again, all that should not need to be true, but it's just a willingness from every organization all the way up to the president of the United States actually saying, what would I want my wife to be experiencing? What would I want my sister to be experiencing? What would I want my daughter to be experiencing? Let that be the common denominator. And whatever those answers are, then let's just give it to everybody, and let's just make it right for everyone.
Awesome. Preach, Michael. And I also want to say thank you again. I also learned so much from everyone. And just three things for me. Take the fight within your space of control, or your sphere of control. That's kind of what I did with the tech companies that I've worked for. Saw the opportunities and kind of took that fight within, and it took a while, but we were able to get things going. Second is be innovative, right? So there's this thought that caregiving is finite. So for some reason, leave ends when the kid is 3 or when they go to kindergarten, but caregiving doesn't end there. And so there might be other ways that we can take a look at caregiving in a more innovative way, where, to Molly's point, there are these little windows that are important, right? So I have 4 girls ranging from the age of 6 and 16. I'm going to need to take time away to go look for colleges and to support my daughter when she starts going on that journey. I have a daughter who's got anxiety and depression. There are days where she just can't function, and so I have to be there for her. So there are other ways that we can take a look at leave and caregiving and maybe tackle it in that way. And then the third is that I've learned, taking from my immigrant, my immigrant heritage, I think we have to reframe our values to make them more inclusive and less individualistic. The US is such an individualistic country. We value independence so much that I think it's taking a toll on a lot of our policies and the way we just do things as a culture and as a society. And so maybe if we take a step back and kind of edit out the things and the values that would really take us to a better America, I think that's a good place to start. So.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Molly and Haley and Michael. Congrats on your new baby. I am so grateful and inspired by all the beautiful ways that you're showing up for your communities and for your spheres of influence and how you're advancing this issue. We're super grateful that you were with us today. A couple of housekeeping notes before we wrap. In November, Fathering Together is hosting more workshops like this one and more dad chats that are focused on gratitude. So if anyone listening isn't already on receiving their newsletter, we want you to sign up on the homepage of their website. And, forgive me for plugging the organization one more time, but this is so important. There are nonprofits like Fathering Together who are trying to really advance these issues, and they can't do so without, y'all's financial support. So in case you didn't know, Fathering Together works with dads worldwide on issues of gender and racial equity, and also job skills training, substance abuse, certainly care equity, and other equity issues. And your financial contribution can help them ensure that all dads, no matter their background, can gain the skills and resources they need to improve the lives of their children. So any support would be greatly appreciated. I had my son, Jack, 13 years ago. I feel like we've come such a long way. So even though today's a tough day, knowing what happened yesterday, I do see the progress and I'm grateful for that and know that we're all in it together to keep this thing moving. So thank you to you all for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.